Sometimes people enjoy skipping a bit ahead in a book. They like to read the end because they want to know where it's all going. That's not always helpful, though, because in some books you get to the end and you realize that you don't know the characters and you don't know the details, and the ending just does not help very much. The closing chapters just don't help you get a grasp on what's happening. To skip ahead in the Bible does give you an experience a little bit like that. If you go straight to the book of Revelation because you want to see how everything ends, you may get some sense of God winning the battle, but you may not quite understand the characters and the events that are going on, the details. And that's because all of Revelation, the book of Revelation, that is, requires an understanding of what came before. In many places, many passages that reveal future events, such as this very one that we are reading today, this very text here. Ironically, when studying the 70-week prophecy of Daniel, well, most of us want to skip down to verse 27 and see just what is happening, because that is the end, and that is the pertinent part of understanding perhaps some of what is going on in Revelation. But if you continue this process of skipping ahead, you are going to miss a lot and perhaps be misled as far as how to understand all of this. In fact, as we have been studying this 70-week prophecy, we see that it has actually taken us about 3 Sundays to get to where we are today. Actually, 4 if you want to count Daniel's opening prayer at the beginning of this chapter. Through this study, we have seen that these weeks that are mentioned here are actually weeks of years. They indicate 490 years total of history for the nation of Israel. And this prophecy, this message, was God's answer to Daniel's prayer delivered through the angel Gabriel. And it was given specifically to the Jewish people for God's redemptive purposes. We saw that in our first session as we got into verse 24. And then in our second session on these 70 weeks, these 490 years, verses 25 and 26, we saw that these verses cover 69 of the 70 weeks. In other words, the vast majority of it, save that very last week. It covers a lot of history, and we looked at that history, and we saw what happened, including the death of the Messiah, that he would be cut off for his people. Now we focus on the final 7 years of the prophecy, the final week. And we see how it brings everything to a conclusion. And it's here that we come to see the second most impressive figure of the prophecy. The Messiah came, but then this other figure is the prince who is to come. Verse 26 first introduces him, but not him necessarily, just his people, the people who would come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. We'll see that in this passage, in this verse, I should say, he is setting himself up to replace the Messiah in Jewish history. Now, if we want to take the Hebrew word for Messiah, which is Mashiach, and put it into Greek, we get Christos, Christ. And if this person, this prince who is to come, is seeking to replace the Christ, he is then, by definition, the Antichrist. The Antichrist. And that is who we are studying this evening. As we close out this prophecy about Israel, we are considering the activity of the Antichrist. And we're doing so in 4 ways this evening. So from verse 27, we are seeing first that the Antichrist will affirm peace. And we see that in the first part of verse 27. He will affirm peace because he is going to be the counterfeit Prince of Peace. Second, we will see that he will attack the Jewish faith. He will attack the Jewish faith. And that will lead into the third point. The Antichrist will abominate God. He will abominate God. Fourth and finally, though, we will see the Antichrist will be ashamed. He will be ashamed, and there will be an end for him. And we will see that. But first, let's consider this prince who makes desolate by considering his first or his false offer of peace, his false offer of peace. The Antichrist will affirm peace. Again, verse 27, part A, and he will make firm a covenant with the many for 1 year. Now, of course, the pronoun here is one of the most debated parts of the text. Who is the he? Who is the he here? Does this refer to the Messiah? Some would say this actually refers to the Messiah. And the Messiah is actually putting an end to the offering in the temple by having the city destroyed. But that's not quite correct here. If we are looking back to verse 26, what we want to look for is something known as the antecedent, which is the closest noun that this pronoun could be referring to. And that would not be the Messiah in verse 26. It would actually be the prince who is to come. The prince who is to come. And so that is the he who will make firm a covenant, or make a firm covenant. You know, even if we ignore the grammar here, the activity of verse 27 just simply does not match the activity of the Messiah. You can try to reread it as saying that, but there just simply is not a way of reading it as saying that. For instance, the Messiah's ministry was not 7 years long. And so you have to take what has been literal for 483 years and then suddenly make the 7 years of ministry somehow figurative for his actual earthly ministry, which was not 7 years. And that's just one of the problems with this. Now, who is this prince? Who is this prince? Well, remember that this prince, who is, again, not the Messiah, he is a false Messiah. He is an Antichrist. He is the head of the fourth empire that Daniel has been prophesying. When we were in Daniel 2, we saw that Nebuchadnezzar had that vision of the four kingdoms in the single statue. And in Daniel chapter 7, we saw the four beasts. And they also represented four kingdoms. The same four kingdoms of Daniel chapter 2. And from the fourth kingdom arose a little horn, who then became great, who spoke great boasts. And we noted that he arose from the revived Roman Empire, the Roman spear, really, of the last days. Now, this is the movement of the book. This is where this book is going. And the greater context of Scripture, which also parallels this immediate context here, helps us to identify this person as the Antichrist. Now, as I'm saying Antichrist, I am saying someone who is in opposition to Christ, someone who is even standing in as Christ. And this can be descriptive generally of people who are not necessarily the Antichrist, right? And that's what we see in places like 1 John 2:2, 1 John 2:22, 1 John 2:22, which says this: "Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son." And so we see there that there is a spirit of Antichrist that is present in anyone who denies that Jesus is the Christ. And this Antichrist can be present even in the Jewish people themselves. It can be in Gentile peoples as they deny that Jesus is the Christ. It can be in anyone. It can be in anyone. This is not necessarily talking about the last figure, the little horn that's going to rise up. This is something that can be present today. It was something that was present in John's day. That was an ongoing attitude or disposition. And that's what I mean when I say spirit of Antichrist, by the way. The spirit of Antichrist denies that Jesus came from God. 1 John 4:3. 1 John 4:3. The Antichrist, or the spirit of Antichrist, denies that Jesus came from God. And so people who say, yeah, no, he's not from God, he's from below, he's from Satan, that would be an Antichrist view. Now, of course, if you think about it, yeah, definitionally, yeah, that's what that is. That's an Antichrist view. It goes against Christ. If people deny that Jesus came in the flesh, 2 John 7, if people deny that Jesus came in the flesh, they also are exercising the spirit of Antichrist. Now, that's not something that is necessarily as big a one today, but it was very big in John's latter years, and then going into the 2nd and 3rd centuries, where people began to deny that Jesus actually came in flesh. That's why John had to focus on that so much in his epistles, where he was saying, we walked with him, and we touched him, and we heard him, and he was there. He wasn't an apparition. He came in flesh. But the point is that there is a spirit of Antichrist that was already present in the world, that is already present in the world, and it continues to be present in the world. Now, if you think about it, one of the things that we mentioned about the final kingdom, the 4th kingdom, the Roman Empire, is that it was a culmination of everything, perhaps some might say everything that was good about man. There certainly were some good advances, like with Pax Romana, that was able to allow the gospel to go out. But it also is a culmination of everything that was evil and everything that was wicked. As you get to the revived Roman Empire at the end, and you get to the Antichrist, he himself will be the culmination of all these things as well. And so everything that I've just been saying about the spirit of Antichrist, all of that will culminate in this final figure of Antichrist, of the Antichrist. He will be someone who denies Jesus. He will be someone who will attack Jesus. And that's why John said, yes, there is also coming the Antichrist, 1 John 2:18. There is also coming the Antichrist, but he said that the spirit of Antichrist is already here. The Antichrist will be the culmination of the spirit of the age. He will embody everything that is wicked and wrong. And he will desire to lead, if possible. He will desire to lead, if possible, even the elect astray. And Jesus warned of that in Matthew 24:24. He can lead even the elect astray. And so he is going to begin a campaign of deception. Now that campaign of deception will begin, it appears, with propaganda, not with violence. He will want to woo the nations before he rules the nations. He will be a little horn that is growing up to dominance. And so before he has that power, of course, strategically, tactically speaking, what he will need to do is to gather support. And he will do so with false promises to help him become dominant. He will mimic the true Prince of Peace by offering his own peace. He will be the one riding on that white horse, as it were, in Revelation chapter 6, verse 2. And he will be bringing in power on the earth through peace first, and then force. And so part of this will be the striking of this covenant, this firm covenant. And the verb for the making of this covenant is forceful. It is a coercive word. It is imposed by a superior power. And so this could be some kind of peace through strength that he brings about, because the term does mean to make strong. Somehow he proposes peace, and he has some kind of military force that is able to back up the peace. And perhaps as he is rising to prominence in what would become the revived Roman Empire, he can then use the forces of Europe to enforce a kind of peace that he wants to bring about. And the object of this covenant is the many. And in context here, the many would be Daniel's people. He will make firm a covenant with the many for 1 week. Perhaps Israel, as one commentator notes here, perhaps Israel has lost any support she may have had previously. And so Israel will in turn accept the Antichrist's authority. Now, of course, he's not going to be advertising himself as the Antichrist. He will essentially be a prince of peace for the people, and that's what's going to be part of deception. And this covenant lasts for 1 week, and that's where we have our missing 70th week of the prophecy. It's a literal 7-year period. As one commentator notes, the events of the last 7 will begin with a covenant. Not with the rapture of the church, it begins with the covenant. This tells us that this is the time of Jacob's distress. Jeremiah 30, verse 7. Time of Jacob's distress. This is not a time for the church. This is a time that will focus again on Israel. Remember, these are 490 years of history for Israel. For Daniel and for his people, for Jerusalem. That's the structure that we've been studying. Also, think about this as well. We studied those 69 weeks, the 483 years, which ended with the Messiah's triumphal entry and his subsequent being cut off. But then verse 26 says the people of the desolate prince will come, and they will, future tense, they will destroy the temple after this. And so between verses 26 and 27, there is a prophetic parenthesis. A gap of undetermined length during which Jerusalem and the temple are destroyed. And that happens in the year 70. It does. It happens in the year 70. And what's so shocking about that is that Jesus was crucified. And of course, there's always going to be a little bit of debate, but probably around the year 32, he was crucified, and then it's not until the year 70 that the temple is destroyed, that Jerusalem is laid waste. There is a gap of time there. And so there is a gap within this framework. And then it's only after the destruction that we see the 7-year covenant. Y'all, we are still in the gap. We are still in this parenthesis. And that is a gap that is large enough to house all of the church age. It is 2,000 years of history. And it is not including the church because, as the New Testament says in places like Ephesians 3, the church is a mystery to the Old Testament. The church is a mystery. It had not been revealed. It had not been revealed. And So what I'm saying is that God's prophetic clock for Israel paused. It paused. But that doesn't mean it stopped. The rest of this prophecy will come true. And Israel's reestablishment as a nation in 1948 signals that the 70th week may begin soon. Because now we have a people who could have that covenant. Now, as I think about that, and I think about the fact that, well, why do they need someone in Europe to make this peace promise? It could very well be that forces within the United States, people within politics, can convince U.S. presidents going forward to withdraw support for Israel. And do we not see this very move today? I'm hearing more and more voices on the left and the right, not just on the left, but also on the right, who say we need to stop sending money to Israel. We need to stop supporting Israel. Israel can take care of itself, or take care of herself. We don't need to help the nation anymore. We need to just do our thing. People are accusing the president of being the puppet of the prime minister of Israel. And eventually, that kind of rhetoric will win out. That is my prediction there. Now, the Bible doesn't say anything about America and about American politics, so this is a little sanctified imagination here. So you have to bear with me. I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, so I can't tell you for sure. But I would suspect that Israel loses its support from America. Something happens, and then someone arises in Europe with an offer of peace. The Antichrist will pose as the world's peacemaker. He'll offer Israel security, and for at least the first 3.5 years, Israel may even breathe a sigh of relief. Perhaps even the rest of the world will see him as doing something no one else could. He is imposing peace on the Middle East, and he is doing so in a way that no American president ever did. He is standing out. But this peace is a false peace. It is the calm before the storm. And the storm breaks exactly at the midpoint of the week. And that brings us to the next point. The Antichrist will attack the Jewish faith. The Antichrist will attack the Jewish faith. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. Now, I hope you understand that the Antichrist won't be helping the Jews because he loves them and he loves their religion. That is not why he's going to be helping. He might be getting some kind of economic remuneration from Israel for the peace treaty, but the appearance of capability that he gains from establishing this covenant will be his true reward. And around the midpoint of the treaty, he will feel free to break his word and to turn on the Jewish people. Now, when exactly will this be? It says in the middle of the week. From other passages, as we begin to factor in other aspects of prophecy, what it appears here is that this is a very exact term. It is literally in the middle of the week. That is 3.5 years in. And the actual terminology that's given in Scripture, and you can see this in various places, you can either see it described as 1,260 days, that would be 1,260 days, and on a 360-year calendar, that is 3.5 years. It's also designated as 42 months. It's also designated as a time, times, and half a time. And so a little bit more poetic there, but time being a year times 2 years, and then a half time, that would be 3.5 years. And we can see that in various places, just two of them to throw out here. Daniel 7:25, and Revelation 12:14. And we have talked about that in the past, but it's worth repeating. This is the midpoint of the week, of the 7 years, of the 7-year tribulation. And this is the point where Jesus himself said, then there will be great tribulation. Great tribulation. Matthew 24:21. This is as God's wrath upon the earth intensifies, and the Jewish people suddenly are not at peace anymore. This will begin with the Antichrist breaking his covenant, his peace agreement. And the text here notes that he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. Now, what in the world is that talking about? Well, this is a technical expression for the entire Levitical system of worship. And you might say, okay, yeah, that makes sense, and that would make sense to Daniel. They have the temple there, but there's no temple today. There's no temple. There is now in Israel, but there's no temple. In fact, as far as folks are concerned, usually we are all agreed that the Dome of the Rock, the Arabic mosque that is there, the Muslim mosque that's there, is actually standing right in the middle of where the temple should be. And so how is there going to be a temple? Well, it is possible, and very likely, in fact, that the Jewish temple will get reconstructed at some point in the future. And there are people who are pushing for this. Of course, there's the Temple Institute, and people sometimes send me things, oh, did you see, they got this, and it sure looks like people are preparing for something. Now, people prepare for things. That doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily happen. But if it were going to happen, they are prepared. And that's interesting. Perhaps this peace plan that the Antichrist enforced at the beginning of the 7 years allowed for the reconstruction of the temple. And that would be something that no one since 1948 has been able to accomplish. No American president certainly could say, yeah, I was able to get the temple in Jerusalem. There is no temple there. No one's been able to untangle that knot or cut through the knot. The Antichrist appears to have done so. And that may be why he appears to some people to be this Prince of Peace. Because he had done something so wonderful, so great. He brought the temple back to the Jews. And I don't know how he did that. Perhaps the idea of force in the covenant was something that was able to be accomplished. Maybe the world turns on Muslims finally, or maybe he figures out a way of putting the temple somewhere else. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it will happen, it appears. If it does happen, I want to be clear. What will be constructed there is not the temple of Christ. It will be the temple of Antichrist. And he will use it for his purposes. He will use it for his purposes. Now, as we think about him deciding at some point in the middle of the tribulation to put an end to the sacrifices, to the grain offerings, that does remind us of another figure in history, and that's Antiochus IV. And we talked a little bit about him several weeks back. In the apocryphal book of 1 Maccabees 1 talks about the fact that he put an end to these things and that he attacked the Jewish faith. he really is a type, an archetype of the Antichrist. And the Antichrist himself will also do this. And that's because the Antichrist is a man of sin. He is a son of perdition, 2 Thessalonians 2:3 says. And he will be responsible for this temple, for its existence. And being proud and boastful, he will see it as an opportunity to proclaim himself one day. That moment when he decides that will be the abomination of desolation, which Jesus warned about in Matthew 24:15. That's when that becomes a reality. Even as we consider this and think, oh, wow, how could God allow all of that? God is allowing all of it, and God even has sovereign control over this. As this prophecy reveals, God is declaring the end from the beginning so that we know that he is in control of all of this, so that people living at that time will know that he is in control of all of this, and it is all going according to his divine plan. The same God who decreed the first 69 weeks has decreed this final week so that sin would be finished, so that transgression would end, and so that everlasting righteousness can be brought in, verse 24 says. And so it's on that point that we get to the final point of what the Antichrist will do. The Antichrist will abominate God. He will abominate God. We see, and on the wing of abominations become one who makes desolate. Now, this expression, wing of abominations, is very picturesque. And it's one commentary notes it's like a bird of prey spreading its wings, ready to swoop upon its victim. This is an overspreading, though, that will overwhelm the land of Israel with abomination. And abominations, what are those? Those are those idolatrous, filthy, loathsome practices that God's people should despise. Well, the prince who shall come is one who makes desolate with these abominations. Of course, the central abomination will be in the wing of the temple, or it will begin there, and perhaps that also is in view, and it says in the wing of abominations that this is actually starting to take place in the wing of the temple, where worship is ostensibly occurring for the true God. Now, of course, these are going to be people who are offering sacrifices. Again, that they are not offering sacrifices in a Christian way. They are still Jewish unbelievers. And they are just simply worshiping as though the Old Testament is still valid. As far as its worship is concerned, that is. They're just skipping over the New Testament. They don't acknowledge Christ as their Messiah. In fact, some of them may even be thinking that the Antichrist is the Messiah, because he was the one who was able to construct this temple. And so they are offering sacrifices in an unapproved manner. God is not going to be approving of these sacrifices. However, when the Antichrist comes in to abominate this temple, God recognizes, and so should the rest of the world, that this is going to be an attack, not just on the Jewish faith, but on God himself. On God himself. See, the Antichrist's goal was not to provide a place of worship for the Jewish faith, but it was to control all religion and direct worship for itself. As one commentary notes, after 3.5 years, the Antichrist will break the covenant, seize the temple, and put his own image there, and he will force the world to worship him. Another commentary notes this: to receive such worship, he will terminate all organized religions, posing as the world's rightful king and God, and as Israel's Prince of Peace, he will turn against Israel and become her destroyer and defiler. And he will do all of this to bolster his claims to be God. So he will demand exclusive worship. As 2 Thessalonians 2:4 declares, in fact, let's take a look there. 2 Thessalonians. I've been quoting a lot of scripture. Let's do a little work here. We can exercise ourselves a little bit. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. And what do we see there? We see that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. He actually is going to claim to be God. And he's going to take his place in the temple. That's 2 Thessalonians 2:4. Now, he will terminate all organized religion that does not center on himself, and he will force the world to bow down to him and to his image. And so what began as a political treaty will quickly devolve into religious tyranny. This is the abomination of desolation that Daniel mentions again in Daniel 11:31 and Daniel 12:11. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, and he'd like to call himself Epiphanes, he gave a preview. And what did he do? Well, he abominated the temple too. And he set up an altar there, and he set up an image to Zeus in the temple, not an image necessarily to himself, but he did also want people to worship him because he saw himself as a god. But Jesus pointed to a still future fulfillment. Some people think that when Jesus talked about the destruction of the temple, he was just talking about, or the abomination of desolation in the temple. They thought he was just talking about when Titus comes in the year 70 and destroys the temple. But Titus didn't set up an image of himself to worship. He didn't abominate the temple in that way. The Antichrist, however, will not merely stop sacrifices, he will defile the holy place by erecting an image of himself for worship. And he will stand in the temple, and he will proclaim himself as God. He will blaspheme. He will blaspheme. The desolating God himself, through a temple, he himself constructed. And you can see how it all comes together at that point. The Jews thought that this was going to be something for them to honor God. It was actually something for the Antichrist to use for himself later. But even here, God remains sovereign. The desolator doesn't act outside of the bounds of God's will. And with that, we come to the final point here. The Antichrist will be ashamed. He will be ashamed. Let's look at the rest of this verse. We read, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So Daniel was probably concerned. I imagine he was concerned at this point about this final figure. He was concerned previously about this final figure. The Jews who are going to be living in those final days are probably also concerned about this figure. And hopefully they are turning to these prophecies and seeing, wait a minute, he's the Antichrist. The Christ must have already come, and they will find the true Messiah. And so the final clause provides the Antichrist's reign of terror isn't endless. It only lasts until. There is a terminating point, a terminus with this reign of terror. And it only happens until the end that God has decreed. So this prophecy predicts that this judgment will be poured out like a flood. Now that's an interesting picture, especially in this context here, because in verse 26, it says that the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. And we saw that it was very much like that as the Roman soldiers were coming in. They were killing the men, the women, the children there. There was 1 million people dead in the city. The temple was thrown down. Not one stone was left upon another. We see that a flood came through the people of the prince who was to come. And he himself will attack with a flood. He will try to create all of these abominations to make everything desolate. And he will attack the Jewish people. In fact, we see the picture of Satan, the great serpent, in Revelation 12:15, where he releases a flood in an attempt to take out the woman Israel in those final days. He opens his mouth in a flood to take her out. But he is unsuccessful. Here we see, though, that a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the desolator. God has his own flood that's coming. And it will be poured out on the Antichrist. Now, of course, we do recognize, okay, this is speaking metaphorically. Because we know that there wasn't a literal flood with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. There was a flood of people, and this is a common expression of talking about the kind of destruction that is to come. We know that God will not destroy the world with water again. This is talking about a flood of judgment that is to come, metaphorically speaking, upon the Antichrist. And this is the irony of God that is at work. He wanted to pour out a flood, but now God is pouring out a flood on him. God is pouring out a flood on him. And this decreed destruction points to the second advent, the coming of Christ, his second coming. He'll defeat the Antichrist. It won't be the Jewish people rising up in rebellion this time. We won't be reading about the Maccabean revolt of the future age. It will be Jesus Christ himself, the true Prince of Peace. But he's coming back with a rod of iron and with a sword. And he will slay the armies of the Antichrist with the sword of his mouth. And we will see that he will take the Antichrist. And he will take the Antichrist false prophet who he had been sending out to deceive the world, to get worship for him. And he will cast them both alive into the lake of fire. And that is terrifying. We read about that in Revelation 19:20. Of course, look back to Daniel 7:11, 26. That little horn of Daniel 7, the beast of Revelation 13, the man of sin of 2 Thessalonians 2. These all describe the same individual whose career ends at the glorious appearing of our Lord. The one who sought to replace the Messiah will be crushed by the Messiah he opposed. And this has already been prophesied back in Daniel 2. Because that statue of the four kingdoms is crushed with a stone that is not cut out with hands. That stone will grind the kingdom of man to dust. That is what the second coming of Christ will be. So wrapping this up, this is one of the Bible's greatest prophecies. Daniel 70 weeks predicts the coming, cutting off, and even return of the Messiah, the true Messiah. These weeks foretell of an evil ruler who will persecute God's people, yet whose doom is already decreed. They place the victory of Christ over all. God has a sovereign plan for the nations, for history, and he will prove himself as Lord over all. Now, for today, we live in that parenthesis. When the church age is present here on earth, and when Israel is partially blinded. We read about that in Romans 9 through 11. That partial blindness will come to an end, though, with the end of the time of the Gentiles. And that will be a 7-year period where the Jews will begin to wake up and start to see their need. Not for temple sacrifices, but for the once-for-all sacrifice of the Messiah. And the Lord says, when they look upon him, whom they have pierced, and mourn for him, as one mourns for a son, and say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, then he will return. And that is a time that is coming. We are just waiting for it, and we are praying that the Lord will hasten that day. Like the Apostle Paul, we just simply have a heart for the Jewish people. We pray for them. We share the gospel with them. Gentile believers do owe Israel a debt for being brought near and for receiving the scriptures and the Savior through them. And we should repay that debt by sharing the gospel with them and with anyone who needs to hear. With anyone who needs to know this Messiah who is coming again to rule